You've got it. You better stop it. Ooh. You've got it. You've got it.
On this episode of the Ready State Podcast, we are delighted to welcome Chase Jarvis. Chase is an award-winning artist, entrepreneur, and Emmy-nominated director, recognized as one of the most influential photographers of the past 20 years. He has shot global campaigns for Apple, Nike, and over 100 brands, and contributed to the Pulitzer Prize-winning New York Times story, Snowfall. He founded several startups, including Best Camera, Apple's App of the Year, and CreativeLive, an online learning platform serving millions of creators, acquired by Fiverr in 2021. He is following up his best-selling book, Creative Calling, with his brand new book, Never Play It Safe, out on October 8th, 2024.
We have known Chase for a hot minute.
Oh, almost 15 years.
I was on a 2-day live course with Tim Ferriss, and they were like, hey, you should have your own course. And we launched Becoming a Supple Leopard on that course in like January of 2013. Yeah, it was pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Chase at that time was doing so many things, and CreativeLive was really, really important to so many creators. It's sort of hard to appreciate how many different versions of Chase. I mean, he was introducing the Lumineers. It's bananas what this guy's done. So because we have seen him through so many iterations, I was really excited about this book because that guy is a risk taker.
Yeah, he really is. I mean, he's personally and professionally a risk taker. And I think he's really distilled down his sort of many, like the 9 lives of Chase Jarvis in terms of the ways in which he's reinvented himself throughout his life, you know, both as an athlete and professionally and as a creator. And what I loved about his book, Never Play It Safe, was just how practical it is.
Yeah.
I mean, there were a lot of things that really caused me to stop and think, hey, I really need to rethink the way that I'm doing this or approaching that. And I feel like there's going to be a lot of things from his book that I am actually going to implement into my life.
You and I think we have talked about it. We've talked about it. I don't know how much on camera, but there's been a lot of risk taking in our lives. And some of that was just as a function of paddling and racing class 5 and just doing it day after day, being responsible for a ton of the safety and health of lots of strangers on these big class 5 rivers. And oftentimes you and I say that, hey, you know, people have asked us, how is it you are so comfortable taking risk? And that we just sort of became risk, diversified, risk immune, just, and from starting new businesses to, going to law school or PT school. So a lot of this book really resonated with me because I saw the truth of underneath of following our guts, of listening, and then also really focusing. Like when we want to get something done, we just knuckle down and do it. This is a great practical guide for that.
Yeah, I mean, I really cannot recommend this book enough, and it really just takes a unique perspective on sort of how to
it's not just
rethink.
rah at all.
Yeah, it really will, I think, give everybody a lot to think about, and we touch on some of the, key parts of the book in this conversation. And, I think because we've known Chase for so long and have, a friendship and history with him, it was just a really lovely and interesting conversation that I think you all are really going to enjoy.
Lastly is that, having known someone so long, what I can say is that this book is not bullshit. It is full of the things that this guy is actually doing, and we know it works.
Yeah, it's authentic. So I'm excited to share it with you and share this awesome conversation with Chase Jarvis. Chase, welcome to the Ready State Podcast. I just speak for both of us when I say we are very delighted to chat you up today.
I am so grateful to be on the show. I love you both. I wish I could be in person with you, but this is the next best thing.
Next best thing. So, we obviously know you. We've known you for many, many years. Consider you a friend. Yeah, I think it's even more than a decade. Consider you a friend. But many in our audience may not know you because I think we're sort of running in adjacent complementary circles.
Yes.
But you've done a lot of really cool things in your life. I don't know how you would summarize it for an audience, but if you could just try to tell our audience a little bit about who you are and what you're up to in life.
Of course.
And I just want to set up for everyone, professional soccer player, go.
Our paths are intertwined in myriad ways, and we've known each other for more than a decade. My background is as an athlete, an artist, and an entrepreneur. Kelly alluded to soccer. I went to college on a soccer scholarship, played in the Olympic development team, really thought I was going to play pro soccer my whole life. That was the intention. And then I sort of realized that actually, when I thought about it, that was the goal that everybody else had for me in my one precious life. I then sort of pivoted and said, oh, okay, well, what's the next coolest thing that the world would think if I was not a pro athlete? And then I got to doctor, and I said, yeah, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do that. And then a week before medical school, I bailed on it to become a photographer. And of course, you can imagine my poor parents, right?
Already,
Right.
like they're like, you're gonna play soccer. There's
Yeah.
tens of dollars there. Okay, that's okay.
Okay.
Okay. Oh, med school. Oh,
Okay,
Yeah, yeah.
be
photography.
respectable.
That's cute.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
They're like,
cute.
that's cute. Let's see
You're
how
gonna
it
make hundreds.
goes.
Exactly. And the funny thing is that when we align with our purpose, the world starts happening for us rather than to us. And it transformed my world. And I became one of the top commercial photographers in the world, working for Nike, Apple, probably 85 of the world's top 100 brands, shooting global campaigns and directing television commercials, nominated for an Emmy for some television shows. Best-selling author, written a number of books, and I got a new one out, which we're going to talk a little bit about today, which is called Never Play It Safe. But I think that I identify as a lifelong athlete. And to give a little bit of backstory, I've also built some companies, one of which was called CreativeLive, which was the world's first live streaming
Holler.
learning platform. Yeah, that served tens of millions of customers, earned hundreds of millions of revenue, and had amazing featured guests like you all on the platform. Others like Tim Ferriss, Richard Branson, Mark Cuban, Brene Brown, some of the, I think, smartest and most talented people in our culture. And that building that company was an absolute treat. That was acquired in 2021. And then I started thinking, gosh, what do I want to do with my life? What do I really want to do with my life?
Yeah, you're still a young man. I mean,
It's
that really,
the dashing
it is really
dapper.
true to sort of have this incredible work history and still at scratch. I mean,
Yeah.
what you told me about this book when we were having lunch
In Aspen.
in Aspen at the outside
fancy.
festival,
Yes.
and
Wait, wasn't it like the Aspen Institute or something?
no, it was
Anyway, I digress. Sorry.
yeah. But what's amazing is that I have a bunch of friends who are pretty incredible. And when you look at their lives, it looks like there's a straight line between you woke up, you opened your eyes one day when you were a child,
Overnight success.
and then there's just like straight lines of ass kicking for decades. And when you sort of pan in for a second, there's a lot of change, of pivot, of reinvention, of chasing curiosity. And I think the through narrative for all those people is that they've never ever, it's always they're generalists and they repurpose and they chase what's interesting, but you probably maybe are the marquee person in that. You've held the door open for so many people and do so many things. And I remember you're like, hey, I'm kind of incubating on this idea. I think I got this, I have something to say, and here you are. So I'm really excited to lean into this.
Appreciate it. And I do agree. And that's one of the things that I love about what you all do is anybody that has a body, you can help. Clearly you guys have helped so many people all over the world in so many different disciplines. And I like to think that that is part of what, I want to do with my talents, is help other people sort of find the best in theirs. And as a person who, again, let's just go back to being really young. In second grade, my second grade teacher, Ms. Kelly, it's the ice cream social and parent teacher conferences. They were smart, right? They put those two things together so that parents can have this conversation with the teacher while the students like down the hall at the gym getting ice cream. And they made it a little thing. And I step into my classroom. There's like a line, some people, and it's just enough to hear Miss Kelly say, Chase is not that creative. He's not very good at art. He should really stick to sports. And I had I had a comic strip that I was doing. Yeah, I had a comic strip that I was selling. I had a magic show. I had a stand-up comedy routine. Actually, let me tell you the punchline. You can delete this if it's inappropriate for your audience. The punchline was, and I'm doing this in second grade, a stand-up comedy routine, the talent show. What has 52 teeth and holds back a monster?
What?
My zipper. And you can imagine the look on all of the adults' faces in this gymnasium. And I don't remember, because I had no idea what it meant. I had overheard this joke. I just thought it was funny. But you can imagine the horror. And I just remember saying, okay, this is getting a rise out of the adults. I like it. But the punchline out of all this is Miss Kelly sort of shot it down, and she said, hey, look, you should really be an athlete. Turned out I was a good student, but like so many things in our lives that we don't know how we got to where we are, I just started doing the things that everybody else wanted for me. Like what Miss Kelly thought I should be, a jock. So I did. I went on and I won all of the races in the track club, and, was the star of the basketball team. And then later was the captain of the football team, and dated the cheerleader, and then went to college on an athletic scholarship. And I basically fulfilled the dreams of this random second grade teacher.
Nailed it.
But the punchline is that we do this for so many things in our lives. And yet the people that we ultimately end up looking up to, respecting, admiring, they are the people who have gone inward, figured out who they are, and then been the most amazing version of that. And so this book, my book, Never Play It Safe, is the story, not just of me doing this, but of so many of the people, like some of the ones that I just listed earlier, many of our mutual friends, people have been on your podcast, and legendary historical, pop culture feature people. The people who have really broken out. They have gone against convention. They've listened to who they truly are and become the best version of themselves. And to me, you guys do that with people and athletes. And to me, that's one of the things that I want to do, help people become absolute best versions of themselves. And that's, to me, that's what it's all about.
So what do you think? I mean, if you reflect back on that moment where you were like, I'm dropping out of med school, I have been kind of doing, you absorbed what Miss Kelly said, and you're like, sweet, okay, yeah, I guess I'm not a creative. And,
Teachers aren't important. They're not very
and you
informative.
just sort of towed the line and did these other things, and
Sure.
were successful by all measure, right? You got into med school and did well and were an amazing athlete. But if you look back at that moment where you decided, hey, I'm going to not go to med school and I'm going to become a photographer, like what did you draw upon to make that decision?
That's an amazing question. And to me, it's at the foundation of all of this stuff. And there's a tiny, tiny little voice inside all of us. And we get taught, actually there's a handful of tools, but one in particular, a tiny, tiny little voice that we get taught to ignore. And that voice that we get told to ignore is who we really are. We're not this thing, we're not the organ between our ears. We are so much more. And when you walk, what is it? You walk 1 degree off, but if you walk for, 10 years, you're 1,000 miles from home. And I have found that happens to so many of us. We get talked out of our dreams by people who've given up on theirs, and sort of unknowingly. And when I deconstructed, my life, all of these times, these little tiny betrayals, they turn into tiny betrayals, in that you're $100,000 in student debt, or you're pursuing a career that you don't, that you're not passionate about, or something that doesn't interest you. And when you actually can pay attention, you hear that little voice inside, and you start doing the things that are sort of this unapologetic, authentic you, again, the world starts happening for you rather than to you. And just think of, I bet you both can look back when you decided, oh my gosh, this is who I am. I want to snap into being this, legendary athlete or paddler, or even the line of work that you're in now. When you stepped into that, it felt like there was some sort of momentum, inertia, alignment, connection. And what I lament is that there's no evil overlord, but we all get talked out of, or the world tries to talk us out of being who we are. It fronts as like it wants us to do what we do, until you say, I'm going to be, bail on medical school and professional soccer to become a photographer. And then all of a sudden the world's like, whoa, time out. Mom,
one step too far.
Exactly. I want to be a world champion paddler. Mom might say, yeah, I want my kid to be a world champion at anything. But, the thinking of like, so where does that land? Like, what's the picture there? You tell me the rest of the story after the Olympics or after the world championships. And it's a difficult path to predict, and it's a difficult future to see. It's not an accountant, no disrespect to accountants, I love mine. And yet it doesn't, like, whatever the end thing is, the reality is that the world just does a very good job of programming against it. And yet when we look out on the horizon and they're the people that we respect, admire, and appreciate, most of those people have taken some sort of a real look at who they are, and then they are that unapologetically. And to me, that's A, sexy as hell. That's one of the reasons we love rock stars. But B, like, that's, to me, that is the highest version of, living this one precious life, is, are you the person you're supposed to be? And can you unapologetically say that? The cool thing is nobody gets this right. So if you're listening and you're not doing that, hey, not talking to you. But we all have something to learn. This book is about me betraying myself a number of times, but all you have to do is find your way back one more time, then you abandon yourself. And to me, that's very, very doable for everybody listening.
I love that the heart of this message is deconstructing sort of some of these creative leaps that people make and the careers they end up in and the things they're able to do. The heart is just taking risk.
For sure.
Is seeing that, like, it could blow up and actually being really okay with that. Julia and I have talked about this many times because people have asked us, continue to ask us, how do you guys do that? Like, why is that so obvious to you? And we're like, well, early on, we had risk exposure where we had to risk something every day as river guides, or, hey, I'm in charge of these 50 people and you're 19 and you got to make lunch and drive them there and get them home intact and get them down this class 5 river. And then you do that day after day after day after day. And pretty soon you start to be really comfortable with, I have this unknown set of circumstances. I'm going to have to negotiate it today, and tomorrow I'll have to do it again. One of the things that's interesting about, I know you're self-aware about this, is, when you made the jump to photographer,
Sure.
Sometimes it's easy to forget that you had been practicing so many risk skills, so many tryouts, so many blind, potentially treacherous moments that you didn't just end up being like, Life of Walter Mitty, you're on a helicopter, the Rogue Wave song is playing, and you turn around and do it. It literally is, you've sort of habituated yourself to risk. And I want to get into that, because it is really uncomfortable to not know what comes next. And what is it about that? Is it Miss Kelly?
Well, I think I know what it is. And it's the first line of the book, which is, safety is an illusion.
Yeah.
And it doesn't exist in nature. So why do we seek it? And the reality is, the people who coach us, this is what's fascinating about this to me, is, like, where do we get this information culturally? We get it from our parents, from our career counselor, our peers. And this is what's so perplexing about it, is, who are they? They're people that are close to us, that we love, that love us, that care deeply. And yet we end up taking advice from people who haven't lived the life that we want to live. Like, grandma wanted me to be an accountant. My uncle wanted me to be a lawyer. And the reason they wanted those two things is because they care deeply about me, but they just had a very, very narrow view of what was possible with a life.
Or the risk margins
for sure
were tolerable given their experience. That we know you can have a really rich, meaningful life, not for you, but for us, that's safe, that you're going to pay your mortgage and have health insurance.
Totally.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No,
Julia.
go ahead.
You.
No, I was just going to say that I relate so much to that because I went to law school for all of the reasons that you're talking about, doing something practical.
And even seeing family members end up financially insecure.
Yeah, that's why I went to law school.
I was like, I'm going to be able to feed myself.
Me too. I was like, I'm going to be able to make money no matter what. And that is a reason to go to law school and become a lawyer, but maybe not the best one from sort of a passion and purpose and interest standpoint. And it was, you just mentioned it. One of the things that drove me to leave was looking forward and thinking, is there a single person in front of me, ahead of me in my law firm where I go work every day, whose life that I want? And I really like those people. They are smart and I admire them. And, I don't mean a judgment against their choice of life, but their life was not the life that I wanted. So I just love that you say that.
Well, and here we are taking advice from people who haven't done the things and lived the life that we want, which is, that's
Or let me just double tap on that and say,
Sure.
maybe those people can't even imagine a different way of living, right? So you are saying, hey, that's not for you.
Yep.
But you're also saying, hey, I'm not sure you can see what I can see. And that part of that piece, and I would love you to, you don't need to kind of work your way through the whole book.
Sure.
But this intuition piece is really interesting to me because
Sure.
Juliet and I have felt like we've made some bets that seem so obvious to us. And people try to talk us out of it. I mean, my family tried to talk me out of it. Like, you're leaving this job and you're going to do this thing and you're crazy. And for Juliet and I were like, well, this seems like an obvious bet.
The cool thing about all of this, maybe not the cool thing, the fascinating thing about all of this, and I do want to give a little highlight to the structure of the book because it'll help underscore the point you just made. But when I say safety is an illusion, I truly mean it, because the path toward becoming an accountant, or the journey that you were on to be a partner track at your law firm, the belief is that it's safe. And in some ways it is safe. Maybe those ways are financial, but in so many other ways, it's unsafe. It's toxic. And one of the ways is doing something that doesn't, make you thrive and fulfill you and make you come alive. Another way is, the person that you might become if you spend enough time around people who are arguing all the time, as the job of a lawyer is to articulate a clear position, and it helps you think logically and all that stuff. But it actually might be dangerous for you because it might disconnect you from so many things that you are naturally at your core. And so, ultimately, when you're choosing, if I told you that every decision, there are risks in every decision, and so why not make the decision that is most in line with all these other aspects of yourself, your heart, your soul. And Kelly, I'll just go back to you. You mentioned your intuition. Like, the way the book is structured is essentially I've deconstructed all of the ways that I screwed up and all the things that I, when I made decisions that were out of line with who I was. And I also have done this across so many of the world's top performers, many of our friends, we've already mentioned them here, and a lot of historical figures. And it turns out that there is a pattern. And then there's just a handful of tools that I call them, that we all have. They're like our radar. We all have them natively within us. And yet, for some reasons or others, our culture, mass society, Western late stage capitalism, it does a good job of turning a lot of these instincts off. And one of those, to me, I think it's the most interesting one that we know the least about, is our intuition. And if you asked, if I was interviewing you, you could tell me very specifically about instances where you did the thing that most people thought was crazy, whether this was signing a book deal or opening a new gym, or, kicking off, when you moved from mobility WOD to the ready state, or, there's so many different times in your career where you're like, we got a lot of advice not to do that. And yet here you are. And to me, that beautiful, like, learning to actually pay attention to that voice in our head, and I would say in our heart and our body, for example, it turns out that even science says that, that's really powerful. Rational thoughts actually sort of slow and a little bit clumsy, and the ability to tune into your intuition that's stored in the cells, and it actually takes the rational mind into consideration when it's making these, sending these feelings to your gut. So, the premise is there's 7 of these tools. Intuition is one. The ability to direct your attention. Attention is another thing. Our attention has been hijacked. And there are a handful of these tools throughout the book that, to me, are the cornerstones of, if you can master not even all, but just some of these things, this is the key to transforming your life.
So I do want to go back a little bit,
Sure.
because I
Go
think this
anywhere
is
you want.
another. I think this
Your
is
show.
another moment, and such a good story about how you're willing to make pivots. And I think that's part of it, because I think part of this is this willingness to be able to reinvent yourself and pivot.
Yeah.
Even if the people around you maybe aren't initially supportive, or, don't understand what you're doing, or think you're crazy or whatever. But even the sort of the way that this particular book came into existence, I heard you tell the story.
Yeah.
And I'd love it if you would just share how that happened. And I also would love to know what was the other book that was, at least shelved for now.
Sure.
And just tell that story, because I think it's so relevant to why we are having this conversation.
Awesome. Well, go back to that late, what was that? Probably late fall or maybe last fall, where Kelly and I were having lunch in Aspen, and I was telling him about this book. And I was, even at that time, I was saying a lot of the aspects of the book that it didn't actually have in it yet, but that I had a vision for. And the shortest version is this is a second book for a 2-book deal for me. And I was very, very committed. I had taken in a lot of information. I'd been researching for months, writing for about 13 months. And by saying writing, I mean like writing every day. I had a research team, like writing help. I had project managers, everyone rallying around me to try and help me do this book. And something deep in my soul was very, very clear, and that this is not the book that I'm supposed to write. And what I was writing is I was writing a book that was going to be a very successful book about business and creativity. And it had very little authenticity. It would have what my friend Brene Brown calls gold-plated grit, which is you tell a story about how hard something was when it really wasn't that hard, and you end up coming out really shiny and looking good. It had a lot of that in it. And worked on that book. And then 8 weeks before the deadline, I threw it all in the trash. And I basically went up to our place up in the San Juans, locked myself in. And when I was able to quiet all the noise and pay close enough attention, the book that I was supposed to write was very, very easy to write. And it came out in a matter of like 6 or 7 weeks. And that was very easy to hand it in by the deadline. And yet, when, hat tip to my agent and to the publisher who were terrified, right? And to be truthful, like I was scared. And yet, courage is feeling fear and doing it anyway. And when I started realizing that, I looked backwards, and again, everything, all the best shit in my life was when I was faced with things like this, and deep in my soul, my head, my heart, my intuition, it all told me which way to go. And to me, it was very, very clear that this was actually the book. And to be fair, this is where the title came from, because it absolutely felt like, it was career suicide essentially for an author to do that in 8 weeks. And I think therein lies, a narrative of truth, but also there's a little indicator in there that this really is how life works. And that's the system working for you if you let it. I don't know anyone who did perfect thing A, perfect thing B, perfect thing C, and then had this fantastic outcome D, E, F. It just does not go like that. It's a series of self-betrayals, of mistakes. And that's the purpose of this book, is to help us understand that whether you're talking about your physical conditioning, your health, your wellness, it's not about never getting out of shape. That's fiction. And you guys are great at acknowledging it. This is about when we do, how do we respond? And the goal is to respond 1% smarter, better, stronger, kinder than we were the last time. And it's about inching in the direction that we want to go, rather than this false narrative that everything's going to be perfect. And you guys, the ready state is, you guys stand for this, right? You've been advocating for this kind of awareness about physical fitness forever. It would be great if everybody did all of their shit all the time, but that's just
No,
not
it'd be terrible.
real.
There'd be no business.
That's why Built to Move. That's why you wrote Built to Move, right?
Right.
Because it's like, what's the lowest common denominator, and get people on track? And that's what this is about. This is the psychological version of your book is my book.
We were cruising around New York, and there was that really cool store, and they had like a sort of an antique flag that was framed, and it said, "Give a damn." Like that was the motto, just give a damn.
So good.
I want to use that as a sort of an allegory moment, where what's really interesting about what you said was, you're doing this work that's by choice, but that you're not really obsessed with. And it does create dissonance in you.
Yep.
And there's another idea, is that sometimes we get to a put in on a big river, and there's a lot of momentum to get to that put in. Like, you have driven a long way, you've organized your friends, there's like,
Right,
you've
you packed all the
you packed,
food.
like it is ready to go, and the water may be high, it may be too big for you. So we always have this mechanism where we pause and we say, everyone good with this? Because we call it put in pressure. And that put in pressure is what you were experiencing very much.
Absolutely.
Like, I have this contract and I said that I was going to do this. But the other side of that is we have found that our friends who chase obsession using their skills,
Yep.
and you can still, have a side hustle, and that side hustle is paying your bills. But then when you really chase the thing, it is effortless. You give a damn and you end up chasing that. And you sometimes have to say, hey, we shouldn't put on. And that's okay. And everyone's like, that is a mechanism, but it's really, really difficult. Because if you told me, Kelly, I have this dream scenario, we have all these people, we're going to write an amazing book, you have a deal, it's done, I'd take that deal.
Yep.
And that for you, that you're like, that's not the deal. I mean, it's crazy to walk away from that. And yet that's the mechanism that we need to do, chasing that obsession.
Totally. It's so true. And I think for the listeners, part of my self-description and the description around this podcast is as, one of the top commercial photographers in the world. And just so we're clear, like I built that universe photographing sports and primarily action sports, ski, snow, skate, surf, a lot of other surf, but it was literally working with the world's top athletes in every discipline. A lot of time with Serena photographing tennis and Roger Federer, Travis Rice in the big mountains, like all the best surfers. You can and so to Tony Hawk and skateboarding, Shaun White, it's when you are truly, as connected or as close to I was as or am to all these folks, some patterns emerge. And the pattern that you just described about the awareness at the put in, this is the sense that people who are sort of, I guess, truly leaning in and living their dream, there is that exists. And that the cool thing is that's available for all of us. But like you said, there's this put in pressure. And that's the pressure that the world would have you believe is on you right now. And I wrote this book, and I feel like, my central message is all of that pressure you feel to be or become the things that everybody else wants you to be. That's actually you putting in at the wrong place in the river at the wrong time. And if you look at Travis, there's actually a story in the intuition chapter about Travis, who, for anyone who doesn't know, he's the world's best big mountain snowboarder by a long shot. They have when
He's
they're
D's.
Yeah, exactly. When, they have an approach in the backcountry that when they're surveying the run, establishing the snowpack, doing all the things that super high end athletes do at that level for that kind of sport, if there is one person in the crew, because these are all trained, the guides are the trained, the heli pilots, if there's one person in the crew who's leaning backwards for some reason, it's their job to say it. And by leaning backwards, I mean like feels off. It's their job to speak up. And then that's the decision for the day. And he talks about it. I mean, I just got chills on my, my hair on my arm standing up, because that's why Travis Rice is still alive, is because he and the people that he runs with have honed the ability to tune into who they are, to their intuition, to overcome the pressure to be all these other things that people want us to be or become. And imagine, I mean, that is his ticket to becoming the best in the world, is how he's listened to himself, the things this is around overcoming injury, not getting hurt in the line of duty. And that's not to say that we don't get hurt, that we don't get injured, or, all of those things happen. But if you really look at the greats, the people the best in the world, like they have this stuff wired, it's on lock. And, that's part of what makes them great.
This episode of the Ready State podcast is brought to you by Momentus.
Look, I think we should be transparent about how we are supporting Caroline Starrett nutritionally. So one of the first things that we do is we make her breakfast every day.
True fact.
And we try to have a probiotic in there, a protein, a great carb source. We send her off the door with an apple, right? And some of that is because we feel
Yeah,
like
you just never know what's going to happen during the teenager school day.
100%.
They may just eat crumble cookies as their sole source of substance.
Valid. But one of the things that we do there is realize that, hey, here's this moment where we can make sure we're getting enough micronutrients. And I feel like there are a lot of teenagers who are not getting enough micronutrients, right?
Yeah. So in addition to her breakfast in the morning, we always give her an emergency with some creatine,
Yep.
5 of creatine, and then multivitamins and a little vitamin D.
Yeah, she takes that Momentus multi, no problem, vitamin D. And then we try to get her to fuel if she's behind. We've got intra-session carb, which has made a big difference on these big efforts. If she can't eat something, then she always has that as a backup. In the evening, she's on the omegas, and she's on the magnesium.
Yeah, and the reason she takes the omegas at night is she finds that she just tolerates them a little better if she just takes them right before she goes to bed.
Yeah. So it's part of her routine. And I think what's key here is that it's not 1 week or 1 month, it's years of making sure your body has on board what it needs to have on board. And it's really simple to do that. Not very expensive. And now we just know that at least we're covering the bases so that if it is a crumble cookie day,
right.
Or
at least out on the periphery.
Or it's a brown food day at school, right? Then at least we've covered it.
Right. And I think the same principle is true for kids and adults, that obviously like food is where we're going to get most of our micronutrients. But again, there's just some things we like to put in on the periphery.
Caroline does not love the fruits.
Yeah.
I'm like, you have to eat 3 blackberries. And she's like, no. So, and this morning we had these blueberries that are as like big as your face right now. And she's like, I don't want those. So we're just trying to meet the basis in the way we can. And I think this is a great way to make sure your kids have on board what they need to have on board. If you want to learn more, go to livemomentus.com/TRS and use code TRS for 20% off your first purchase.
This episode of the Ready State podcast is brought to you by Element. And we want to talk today about one of our great joys in life, and that is sparkling Element.
Yeah, the sparkling is pretty fantastic. Sometimes I want to be entertained in my mouth.
Not sometimes.
Boo! Party time, 24/7 in my mouth. What ends up happening is, you want to reach for something fizzy. I just can't drink. Like sometimes the fizzy drinks, I just can't do it. I'm so burned out. This hits the spot. It's not a DC. It's not a beer. It doesn't have any caffeine. And it really makes a difference. One of the cool things about the sparkling element is that we have a bunch of friends who are athletes with low blood pressure. And they do not sometimes get enough salt. And we're finding that even with our daughter Caroline, who has really low blood pressure, she just kind of stands up and gets a little woozy. She's been adding the salt back.
Makes a huge difference.
She feels better and she's performing great.
And another cool story from this weekend is there was a woman taking our 102 experience who said that basically for her entire adult life, she's had a Diet Coke a day. And she is going to swap it out for sparkling element. She feels like she's been searching her whole life for an alternative that has like the same sort of mouthfeel and gives her like a little bit of bump in the afternoon. And so what a great way to get rid of a less good habit than with this.
We were working in Germany, and we were hanging out with the German national hockey team, and we went out afterwards, and everyone was drinking non-alcoholic beer. And we were like, they were like, yeah, you can't drink beer, but we want to have the routine. We want to have the ritual of sort of celebration. I'm telling you, Element is the way.
It's so good.
It's so nice to be able to feel like you're doing something special, and it feels good, and it's so tasty.
So tasty.
Have we said it lately?
We literally drink it every day.
Every day. Right now, if you order through our link, you can get a free sample pack of all the LMNT flavors. And if you want a party in your mouth, of course, try sparkling. Go to drinkelement.com/TRS for all the party.
How do you think you could advise people to, turn this intuition into action? And what I mean by that is that I have to think a lot of people maybe do hear that. They hear that voice that's like, this is not what I'm supposed to be doing. This is not my calling. But, sort of feel crushed by all the things in life that make it difficult to make those pivots. Where would you start?
I would start at the heart. And that's, it sounds cliche, and yet that's the foundation for, I truly believe, for everything great. And whether, of course, you can intellectualize anything, and that's the challenge, right? You can, and the people who are telling you what they think of you or what they think you ought to do. There's a great little story. I mentioned Brene earlier. She was on my show once, and she's been a guest many times. And we talked about this also at her house. She is very famous for popularizing this, a quote. It's essentially, it's called the man in the arena quote. And it's a Roosevelt quote, Theodore Roosevelt. And it's a quote about if like it's really the people who are doing the thing, who are in the paint, living their dream, and like that's what matters. And the people who are in the cheap seats throwing stuff down at the people who are in the arena, it doesn't matter. It's your job to ignore them.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful quote. But to me, what's important is what Brene does with that quote. And she has a 1 inch by 1 inch square piece of paper that she keeps in her wallet. And on this piece of paper is the names of the people who she actually cares what they think of her. And it's a 1 inch by 1 inch piece of paper. So that tells you, how few names are on that piece of paper, and that she continually comes back to that. It's herself and these 5 people. If these 5 people have problems with what she's doing, then she has to take a look at it. If it's anybody else, or specifically anyone who's not in the arena, we have to train ourselves not to take that advice. And then to extend this a little bit further and really get the heart of your question, Juliet, is like, well, so what do we do? And the world will have you believe that it's all or nothing, black or white, all in or you're a pussy, you got to do it or you're scared. All these things, this, and it creates a very false narrative about how this is done. And if you look at people who ultimately have become the highest performers, or the people who would identify as free, because that's the subhead for the book, right? It's a practical guide to freedom, creativity, and a life you love. If you looked at it, what they did is they started running tiny experiments. And what if you thought about all of these things not as, there are very few doors in life that you can't walk back through. There are some. We should be clear. You need to take extra care of those decisions, but most decisions you can walk back through. People think, I'll give Richard Branson as an example. He's done 400 companies, one of the world's richest people, lives a pretty good gig. And he was an investor in CreativeLive and a friend and a mentor. And he's like, you know what, man, I'm always protecting the downside. People think I started Virgin Airlines. It was like it's true. He bought a 747, was the first plane he bought for this airline to kick it off, and everyone's like, that's hundreds of millions of dollars. But what people don't know is that he pre-negotiated for Boeing to buy the plane back at a certain rate just when it didn't work, because he was pretty much assuming that it wasn't going to work. So what he was doing is running a pretty tiny experiment. The fee on that was pretty small relative to his net worth, and it turned out to be wildly successful. But that's not the story you hear, because it's not sexy. And we think of, everybody's all in. These athletes will do anything at any cost to win the race or do the thing. And yet so many of them, the smartest ones that I know, especially the ones that have long-term careers of health and vitality, and they're actually playing the long game. And if you ever can't afford to play the long game, you should check yourself, because that's all we're all trying to play, right? Because the short game is rather short. And people like, I just mentioned Serena Williams, like, what an insane career. You think she took care of herself? Of course she did.
I just have to tell you a story. And first of all, I love what you said so much about that. And the story was when I was trying to make this what I felt at the time was an agonizing decision to leave my law practice and go all in on running this business with my husband. I had another lawyer say to me, hey, dude, Juliet, you could leave the law practice today. I think I was like 35 or like 34 or something. And she's like, you could go like try this whole entrepreneur thing for 5 years. And then, guess what? You could come back and be a lawyer, and you could still be a lawyer for 35 more years.
Right.
And I think honestly, that little statement was the tipping point. And I just love what you're saying about like doors aren't always closed.
Totally.
And you just make these tiny decisions. And, guess what? If it had all imploded and not worked out, I could have gone back and had a 35-year, I'm sure, successful career as a lawyer. So
Yeah.
I love what you said.
I just gotta say, running a stretching empire was a small experiment for you. Is that what I'm hearing?
It was a small experiment.
Hey, it turned out pretty good.
I love. There's a couple things I just want to double click on. One is, I want to highlight to people that this book isn't just aspiration and
No,
big
this
talk.
is practical.
It's very tactical.
Yeah.
And one of the things that when reading, I was like, oh, look how tactical this is. Who's on my 1 by 1 inch piece of paper?
Yeah.
Because the internet is a crazy place. The world's a crazy place. And, really, I thought, who are the people, and have I created that conversation where someone's like, hey, I think you're really off here, where I can get, Juliet's leaning back from something, and I have to be like, oh, well, Juliet doesn't, she's not into it. And there's dynamic tension there, because I'm like, hey, Juliet, let's start 300 new businesses this week. And she's like, I don't really think that's a good idea. And I'm sometimes like,
it's more like, hey, let's buy 400 new whitewater kayaks. That's more like the situation.
I can't believe you just outed me right now.
Yeah, I mean, let's be real, Chase.
So
Let's
there's
be real.
that.
He's not thinking about business.
Hey,
He's
how many
thinking about
kayaks do you own, Kelly? One.
Well,
So thank you, Juliet.
that's
So
my fault.
currently, the second thing I really love about the tactical aspects of this, because it really, you sort of mentioned attention and controlling your attention, because I think that is, at the end of the day, would you highlight that, and then
Sure.
I want you to talk about constraint.
Sure.
Those two things, I was like, whoa,
Yeah.
I could still use a little bit more of both of those things.
Well, for the science-oriented folks in the audience, you're a friend, Dr. Andrew Huberman, who has a very successful podcast and has built himself up into really a lovely internet hero, and for good reason. He's done a really good job. He wants to make science, except being I would say, accessible to a lot of people, and he does it in a really compelling format. He said attention is the distinguishing factor in success or failure in any endeavor. That's not the perfect quote, but it's captured in the book, and that is the essence of what he said. The difference between success and failure in any endeavor. And those are big words for a scientist to use. Any.
Juliet just at our counter was like, hey, we have these two projects. I need you to make sure that your attention is on these two projects. She just had this conversation with me.
Yeah,
like,
I mean, I
yesterday
literally
morning.
said, I'm like, if you're doing anything other than working on these two things, you're not working. Like I told him, he's like, you're kind of mean. I'm like, well, but it is, and I would just add to what Kelly said.
But funny.
But funny. He is really funny,
Mean
Chase.
and
He's
No,
so
I'm saying
funny.
you're funny.
Oh, I know.
I am
You're one
funny.
of the funniest
So,
people.
I would love to just keep talking about this attention piece too, because it's so on all of our minds. And, Jonathan Haidt is out there with his book, The Anxious Generation, which is, very relevant for us because we have teenagers and we feel like we had to parent our kids and they're guinea pigs on this, they happen to be born at a time when they're guinea pigs in this terrible experiment that is social media and
so true.
iPhones and whatever. But I think, we talk a lot about kids and how it's impacting kids, and we often don't turn the lens on ourselves and really acknowledge how much our own attention is getting hijacked.
For sure.
And so I guess I'd love to know, how do you manage that in your own life? And what do you recommend in the book, and how do we fight
Give us a
back
place to
against
start
this?
today, for sure.
Because I couldn't agree more that we are.
Well,
we
it's
are
not an
struggling.
accident that it's the first chapter in the book, because essentially there's 7 tools in the book, and it's not an accident that this is the first tool, because it's like the foundation. Because what you pay attention to expands. You've heard whether your attention goes, energy flows, whatever the sort of mantra is. But it's true. It's literally scientifically true. Like, you notice the things you pay attention to, and it just so happens that you actually are choosing how you direct your attention. It is a muscle, and it is a muscle that you can get weak at, and that is things like cheap, easy dopamine. They weaken your muscle to pay attention. The world is a very distracting place. We have diagnoses around, about that, and the world is just designed. It's a very, very tricky place to navigate. Our attention is the goal of many products in our culture today, is to hijack your attention. And yet, for the people who can choose to direct it and who do that well, that is, citing again Huberman, that's like the distinguishing factor between being able to be successful. And just imagine, there are people who have diagnosis about their attention, that it is a struggle for them, and yet those are some of the most successful, happy, fulfilled people in the world, because what they can do is direct it in some other area really, really effectively. So it's not a sort of a blank check. You either can pay it or can't, but your ability to be able to be aware of this, to choose to direct your attention, and to spend time and energy honing that skill. I think I'll say something that will resonate with the listeners, because they probably know our mutual friend Tim Ferriss. I think Tim actually introduced us originally, probably 15 years ago. Shout out to Tim. What's up, Timbo?
What's up, Tim?
Yeah, what's up, Tim? So I think he featured all of us in his book Tools for Titans. Maybe one, or I don't know. I think we were all in there. And I was having dinner, a ribeye steak with Tim shortly after that book came out. We're talking about, I was like, oh man, you wrote this book about, many of these world's high performers. And so what was like the number one thread that they had all, the most people had in common? Number one thread in common was some sort of a practice, a meditation, awareness, mindfulness, prayer, something that is a function of the discipline around directing your attention, whether that's paying attention to the breath, the mantra, the count of your workout, whatever. Number one across all of these people, there's like 300 people featured in the book or whatever. And it's not an accident, right? And yet this is not a skill that we are taught, and yet it is native to us, right? It is our ability to be able to distinguish threats on the horizon. This is why we have a fight or flight. We can notice, should I be scared of the silhouette of this saber-tooth tiger on the horizon? That's our ability. And folks who can pay better attention live longer in that environment. So it is naturally within us, and yet it's been trained out of us. This is why I'm a big advocate of these 7 tools in particular. It's because we don't have to go on a mission to France. We don't have to become a different person, get a different set of friends to access all this stuff. It's natively in us, and it's available immediately. We may need to train our muscles, just like you're not going to go run a 50K race or deadlift 500 pounds. And yet it is there. It's natively within us. And we started exercising that thing. To the point about our kids, if we can teach them good, healthy habits around it, then, that's the first step in probably a long journey, but the journey towards who we naturally are. And I'm telling you, the best version of ourselves is way better than a second-rate version of somebody else.
The piece that the next,
Sure.
I mentioned it, is this idea of constraint.
Sure. Yeah. We got constraints. And then you also said something about time, which I want to talk about, but because you said, Juliet, we're talking about like 35 years. If no one believes that they have the ability to go try this business, it doesn't work out, you can go back and become a lawyer. I'm on my like 4th or 5th. You guys acknowledge that that's part of my, one of my skills is the ability to invent and reinvent. And let's look at somebody like Madonna. I mean, come on, right? Talk about invention and reinvention. That's another one of these skills, is our awareness of what time really is. What if I told you life is long? What would you do differently? I think it would change a lot of behavior in our culture, as an example.
You think people would floss more?
Yeah.
Really quick sub story is that we were at this conference and we did this kind of Jeffersonian dinner, and the most interesting question that we all had to answer at the Jeffersonian dinner was basically exactly that. Like, let's say automatically, all bets aside, like you're all going to live to be 150 years old, and what would you do differently? And people's answers were super compelling.
Yeah.
And just that sort of acknowledgement that you have time, but it turns out maybe even in this current iteration, we do have time.
Yeah, and especially if we're less distracted. This is why these tools are all intertwined. Like if we can direct our attention more effectively, we literally do have more time. If we can do things that bring us joy, we step outside of time. Like this is a flow state. So, the relationship between these things, this is part of why I think, it can get very seductive. You don't have to look far. You just look, you're 30 pages into this book and you're like, wow, this stuff actually makes sense. And then we should address Kelly in the corner over there who keeps bringing up constraints.
No, it really resonates with me.
Yeah. And it does for a reason. And that's because we have been conditioned to believe that constraints are the things that keep us down. The fact that I don't have enough money, or I'm not tall enough, or I'm not fast enough, or any of these especially with respect to natural gifts. And yet, if you look closely at, again, it's sort of like that Huberman quote, success in any endeavor, it's entirely is too strong. It's in large part due to constraints that were present throughout whatever journey, whether this is where you were born or whether this is how fast you are. If you are not fast and you are stocky, maybe it was natural for you to gravitate to the shot put. I'm just speaking very generically. However, this can be seen as constraints. And typically when we look at constraints, the constraints were, we actively chose those things. They're not all. There are many conditions that we do not choose. It's where we're born, what race we are, what gender, how, and all of those things absolutely 100% shape us. And yet, when you decide where I'm going to build my house, you've actively ruled out 50 million other places to build your house. And then you're set with this constraint. Okay, what is the land like in this particular place? What is my view? Where am I going to, and whether we're talking about building a house or building a life, leaning into the things, that is how a creator actually creates. None of us are seeking blank canvases. We think that's what we desire. But if I give an artist a blank canvas and say, paint anything, or I say, you have 4 minutes to paint something only using red, and it needs to have these attributes, people are immediately engaged. And, I think so much about so many of the constraints that you all use in your line of work. And I have to give a hat tip. You guys, anytime I get injured in any way, my first text is to these guys, and I'm basically like healed. I feel like I'm calling the oracle. But think of how many constraints there are with lifting, with, the count. How long are you under load? How many reps are you doing? How long are you doing this? How long aren't you doing this? How long are you icing? What part of yourself are you icing? Like, all of these things are constraints. And when you start to think about them, not as something that holds you down, but as something that empowers you and fuels you, the shift in mindset, it literally is the difference between a basically fixed mindset and a growth one.
I love that. And, just tying that back into something you and I talk about all the time is that everyone's constrained in 24 hours.
Right.
Totally.
Right.
And so one of the things that
we have this body. We have,
Right.
whatever,
Yeah.
we have whatever body we have.
Exactly. That's
and
such a good way to
24
think.
hours, when and where. And that, for a lot of us, as we're talking about the physicality, really clarifies for people where they have agency and some control.
Yeah.
And that piece, the constraint for me is if I don't have cookies in the house, I don't eat cookies. I mean, it's that granular, and yet still we're looking at making choices about when and where we're going to fit these things in, giving all the things. If I'm trying to build my next spaceship or think about my next experiment, when am I going to do that? And how do I create within the constraint of having to do my day job and take care of my kids, where I'm going to have some freedom to develop or train my brain to do that. I love that.
Look at what you guys did with the stand-up desks, right? Kids need to be in school. They need to be able to be in a place where they can direct their attention to the teacher who's teaching them something. And yet, why are we seated? It's, the constraint is we need to put these people in a room and help them learn some attributes about the world. And yet there's lots of the fact that we have to sit at a desk. That is not a real constraint. That's totally made up, and it does a massive disservice. And you can do this on any different vector, and it's really effective with movement. I feel like you were spot on with that. And to me, the goal here with this exercise and with this book in particular is these are things that we natively understand. We've been told one story about them, and it's actually paradoxically something very different. We've been taught to get attention, but what if you really mastered learning how to pay it? We've been taught that life is short. What would you do differently if time was unlimited? Now it's not, I get it, but how would you behave? You'd probably behave in a way that created way more results and way happier, better outcomes if you thought that way. What if you looked at the constraints in your life, not as God, this is bullshit, I can't get to the gym, no, I can get to the gym, just not in these windows. So that tells me exactly where I should look and how can I structure the rest of my life to do that. This is sort of the way I'm thinking about these, and I call them in the book, I call them levers, because this is how you get massive leverage in your life, is just paying attention to these things that are natively all around us, you don't even have to be a master. I talk about mastery, but even basic proficiency with any of these 7 levers are truly transformative. And if you look to the lives of the people that you respect and admire, I promise, I've done the research, they are employing these techniques and tactics. And the last piece I'll say is, as Kelly indicated, This is a ruthlessly practical book. I mean, it has the words "a practical guide" in title. I mean, I had to spell it out for you because that's the way it works in writing books. But these are facts. These aren't just nice to haves.
Yeah.
So one of the levers that I want to make sure we touch on at least a little bit before we let you go is the play. And the reason I love seeing this so much is that Kelly and I have been talking a lot about this in the more recent years when it comes to the fitness space and now also the longevity space, is that at some point we're getting so clinical and so tactical about taking this many vitamins and doing this many exact morning habits and the right routine and this, HIIT training followed by the strength training. And at some point we have lost the narrative that we're supposed to be playing. Totally. And I would love to hear your perspective on it and how, I would just love to hear more about play because I'm a fan.
Let's just think about the human body for a second. Through the lens of when you show up at the Ready State in any form that you guys appear on the internet for your listeners, watchers, people who are participating in your community, like you are aware of the body that we all have. It is meant for action, right? It is meant to take us on amazing adventures in amazing places, to move in amazing and dynamic ways. That's not safety. That shit is not. I mean, look at the shoulder joint. This is a work of genius. I mean, how does it stable and flexible at the same time? And to me, we are, if you'll look at our physicality, we are totally meant to play, to do cool, crazy stuff. And, so that's sort of the lens that I have on it physically. And then why intellectually does work always come before play? Well, the belief is that you had to kill the saber-toothed tiger to have dinner, and that could be true. But what if that was playful? And in fact, where people, that was their job back in the early millennia ago, they were all sorts of playful rituals around this. And Alan Watts does a great job of describing this. The next time you go to do the dishes, you can look at a pile of dishes after a great meal and say, oh my God, I can't believe I have to do all these. Or if you flip a bit in your brain and you decide this is going to be the most joyful set of dishes you've ever done, it's 100% available to you. And in literally anything. I tell a story in the book about a little beach house that we bought up in these islands that are off the coast of Washington. And I didn't know much about the septic tank, and it had me worried. And COVID happened, and I'm like, okay, I got a lot of time on my hands and I can't do anything else. So I tell this story about digging up. And for those who don't know, a septic tank, that's where the waste matter from your toilets are stored. Yeah. It's your shit box, essentially. I'll just say it. And I tell this goofy story about actually digging up this box to learn a little bit more about it, because it was a new house to us. And it turns out that in the process, I mean, it's laughable. All of the people that came around and like, what are you doing? The old Marvin, the neighbor. And it was just an incredibly playful experience. And yet it was hard work. Have you ever dug a ditch? Digging a ditch is hard. So whether you're digging a ditch, you're thinking about how your body is built to move, or you're thinking about what you want to do for your living or life, play is always available to you. It is our natural state. And we have been conditioned to ignore it. I'll say one other thing about our mutual friend, Tim Ferriss, since I'm trying to pull on these threads of people who might be familiar with or your audience might be familiar with. One of Tim's longtime assistants is a guy named Charlie Hone. And Charlie wrote a book about his crippling anxiety and dramatic overwork after working really hard for Tim for a long, long time, and realizing that, wait a minute, I'm stressed out. And the book was called Play It Away. And essentially all he needed to do was to completely eradicate his anxiety was schedule time for playful joy in his life every day. And for him, that was hitting a bucket of baseballs out into a park and then walking with his friend to pick them up. And whatever the recipe for play for you is, I think that success leaves clues, and our past when we were kids and what lit us up and made us, have a great time turns out that that's mostly available to most adults now. Doing stuff like that is what this is this is actually sort of putting juice back in our tank. It's filling, this is the engine of life, is play and joy. And it's always there for us. Yet we're taught culturally to completely ignore it because it's of no value.
You know, one of the things we do that at our office, which I'm so proud of and is so fun, is that and it's almost our way of like protesting this universe that we feel, you know, we have to be connected to, which is social medias.
Sure.
We have this thing at our office called One Bad Idea a Week, and our production team and Kelly, and we all get looped into these ridiculous videos.
Oh, I love these videos.
But they're so fun for us to make.
Yeah.
And we literally could care less if anyone gets it. Like, we made one about the Californians on Saturday Night Live that clearly we don't have the right demographic to understand what it was. But we literally do it because it's playful and fun. It serves no purpose. It doesn't help us sell anything. It does nothing other than just make our jobs a little bit more fun and our days a little bit more fun, and make it just a little bit that much easier to survive, you know, sort of our marriage to social media.
Yeah. That is a great way of thinking about it. And I can say, I feel, knowing both of you well, and for more than a decade, like there's a lot of humor in and around your relationship with your job, with your kids. There's a lot of play and joy, and just look at it's infused in almost everything you do. And, you know, you are a great, and I thought of you when I was writing this book on lots of different occasions, and specifically around play. If you are listening to this right now and you've been in their community for a while, like, it's not an accident that they're successful. And it's not just because they F around a lot. And yet that is a really clear pattern in successful, happy, fulfilled people, is this willingness to play and to infuse play into every aspect of your life. And yes, even work. It's a choice.
So, Chase, this book is coming out in 5 days from now. So what I want to shout out to the audience is one of the best ways that you can support authors and people that you are fans of, like Chase, is to pre-order their book.
Yeah. I mean, if you bought it now, it'll be to your doorstep by the weekend.
By the weekend.
Right? So it's
just
a pre-order, but it's basically...
Go to Amazon right now and buy this book. Not only because it supports Chase and all the awesome work he's done, but also because really, you know, we were lucky enough to get an advance copy of this book, and we get a lot of advance copies. And I think there's like 3 or 4 things in particular that really got us both thinking and talking about how we want to work a little bit differently. And, you know, it really was impactful on both of us. And I'm really grateful for you sharing with us and sharing sharing a little bit about it with our audience.
Yeah, and I can't wait to do a little bit more work, like another, 5 businesses and another 20 or 30 years that you distill down, so it's easier for me. That's really thank you for that, because I just want to get to the punchline. I want to
thanks for making it easy for us.
All my kayaks, and then just be like, well, Chase said.
Yeah, Chase said.
Hey,
I'm really grateful for you. Seriously, it's I mean, you should be so proud, and everybody should have this book sitting on their coffee table.
It's very, very generous of you both. I believe deeply in the book, such so that I risk my career to put it out. And
here's the key.
Totally.
And not a risk at all, man. Quit playing it so safe, Chase.
It was fun to have both my agent and the publisher go like, oh, damn. It worked. You did it. And it's fun. It's fun. I do believe that all the best stuff in life is on the other side of risk and fear and our comfort zone. And I know that would resonate deeply with your audience. Thank you for having me, guys. Big fan. And I'm dead serious about it. I have got so much benefit from being a part of your community for a really, really long time. And I feel like we're just getting started.
Same here. Right back at you.
Last thing. Where do you want to send people? I know chasejarvis.com has all of the places. Is that where we should go to find this thing?
Yeah. The book is called Never Play It Safe. And go to neverplayitsafe.com to chasejarvis.com. I'm just at Chase Jarvis, all on the internet, YouTube, Insta, Twitter, X, whatever they call it now. And if you can't find me, we can't be friends. But
Fair enough.
Fair enough. That's a good way of putting it.
Never play it safe is the title, and that will get you to it quickly. And I, again, thank you so much for sharing some of your time with your community with me, and I really appreciate it.
Thanks, my friend.
Chase.
Thank you for listening to the Ready State Podcast. If you like what you're hearing, check out all our episodes here or at thereadystate.com. And be sure to subscribe and leave a review on iTunes to help others find our show.
Check us out and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at The Ready State.
Until next time, cheers, everyone.
You've got